Book 10. And indeed, I said, I also recognize in many other aspects of this city that we were entirely right in the way we founded it. But I say this particularly when reflecting on poetry. What about it? He said. In not admitting at all any part of it that is imitative. For that the imitative, more than anything, must not be admitted looks, in my opinion, even more manifest now that the soul's forms have each been separated out. How do you mean? Between us, and you all won't denounce me to the tragic poets and all the other imitators, all such things seem to maim the thought of those who hear them, and do not as a remedy have the knowledge of how they really are. What are you thinking about in saying that? He said. It must be told, I said, and yet a certain friendship for Homer and shame before him, which has possessed me since childhood, prevents me from speaking, for he seems to have been the first teacher and leader of all these fine, tragic things. Still and all, a man must not be honored before the truth, but as I say, it must be told. Most certainly, he said. Then listen, or rather, answer. Ask. Could you tell me what imitation in general is? For I myself scarcely comprehend what it wants to be. Then it follows, he said, that I, of course, will comprehend it. That wouldn't be anything strange, I said, since men with duller vision have often, seen things before those who see more sharply. That's so, he said, but with you present I couldn't be very eager to say whatever might occur to me, so look yourself. Do you want us to make our consideration according to our customary procedure, beginning from the following point? For we are, presumably, accustomed to set down some one particular form for each of the particular manys, to which we apply the same name. Or don't you understand? I do. Then let's now set down any one of the manys you please. For example, if you wish, there are surely many couches and tables. Of course. But as for ideas for these furnishings, there are presumably two, one of couch, one of table. Yes? Aren't we also accustomed to say that it is in looking to the idea of each implement that one craftsman makes the couches, and another the chairs we use, and similarly for other things? For presumably none of the craftsmen fabricates the idea itself. How could he? In no way. Well, now see what you call this craftsman here. Which one? He who makes everything that each one of the manual artisans makes separately. That's a clever and wonderful man you speak of. Not yet. In an instant you'll say that even more. For this same manual artisan is not only able to make all implements, but also makes everything that grows naturally from the earth. And he produces all animals, the others and himself too, and in addition to that, produces earth and heaven and gods, and everything in heaven and everything in Hades under the earth. That's quite a wonderful sophist you speak of, he said. Are you distrustful? I said, and tell me, in your opinion, could there be altogether no such craftsman? Or in a certain way, could a maker of all these things come into being, and in a certain way, not? Or aren't you aware that you yourself could in a certain way make all these things? And what, he said, is that way? It's not hard, I said. You could fabricate them quickly in many ways, and most quickly, of course, if you are willing to take a mirror and carry it around everywhere. Quickly you will make the sun and the things in the heaven, quickly the earth, and quickly yourself and the other animals and implements and plants and everything else that was just now mentioned. Yes, he said, so that they look like they are, however they surely are not in truth. Fine, I said, and you attack the argument at just the right place. For I suppose the painter is also one of these craftsmen, isn't he? Of course he is. But I suppose you'll say that he doesn't truly make what he makes. And yet, in a certain way, the painter too does make a couch, doesn't he? Yes, he said. He too makes what looks like a couch. And what about the couch maker? Weren't you just saying that he doesn't take the form, which is what we, of course, say is just a couch, but a certain couch? Yes, he said, I was saying that. Then if he doesn't make what is, he wouldn't make the being but something that is like the being, but is not being. And if someone were to assert that the work of the producer of couches, or of any other manual artisan, is completely being, he would run the risk of saying what's not true. Yes, he said, at least that would be the opinion of those who spend their time in arguments of this kind. Therefore, let's not be surprised if this too turns out to be a dim thing compared to the truth. No, let's not. Do you, I said, want us, on the basis of these very things, to investigate who this imitator is? If you want to, he said. There turn out, then, to be these three kinds of couches. One that is in nature, which we would say, I suppose, a god produced, or who else? No one else, I suppose. And then one that the carpenter produced. Yes, he said. And one that the painter produced. Isn't that so? Let it be so. Then painter, couchmaker, god. These three preside over three forms of couches. Yes, three. Now, the god, whether he didn't want to or whether some necessity was laid upon him not to produce more than one couch in nature, made only one. That very one which is a couch. And two or more such weren't naturally engendered by the god, nor will they be begotten. How's that, he said. Because, I said, if he should make only two, again one would come to light the form of which they in turn would both possess, and that, and not the two, would be the couch that is. Right, he said. Then, I suppose, the god, knowing this and wanting to be a real maker of a couch that really is, and not a certain couch maker of a certain couch, begot it as one by nature. So it seems. Do you want us to address him as its nature begetter, or something of the kind? That's just at any rate, he said, since by nature he has made both this and everything else. And what about the carpenter? Isn't he a craftsman of a couch? Yes. And is the painter also a craftsman and maker of such a thing? Not at all. But what of a couch will you say he is? In my opinion, he said, he would most sensibly be addressed as an imitator of that which these others are craftsmen. All right, I said. Do you, then, call the man at the third generation from nature an imitator? Most certainly, he said. Therefore, this will also apply to the maker of tragedy. If he is an imitator, he is naturally third from a king and the truth, as are all the other imitators. Probably. Then we have agreed about the imitator. Now tell me this about the painter. In your opinion, does he in each case attempt to imitate the thing itself in nature, or the works of the craftsman? The works of the craftsman, he said. Such as they are, or such as they look? For you still have to make this further distinction. How do you mean, he said. Like this. Does a couch, if you observe it from the side, or from the front, or from anywhere else, differ at all from itself? Or does it not differ at all, but only look different? And similarly with the rest. The latter is so, he said. It looks different, but isn't. Now consider this very point. Toward which is painting directed in each case? Toward imitation of the being as it is, or toward its looking as it looks? Is it imitation of looks, or of truth? Of looks, he said. Therefore, imitation is surely far from the truth. And as it seems, it is due to this that it produces everything, because it lays hold of a certain small part of each thing, and that part is itself only a phantom. For example, the painter, we say, will paint for us a shoemaker, a carpenter, and the other craftsman, although he doesn't understand the arts of any one of them. But nevertheless, if he is a good painter, by painting a carpenter and displaying him from far off, he would deceive children and foolish human beings into thinking that it is truly a carpenter. Of course. But in any event, I suppose, my friend, that this is what must be understood about all such things. When anyone reports to us about someone, saying that he has encountered a human being who knows all the crafts and everything else that single men severally know, and there is nothing that he does not know more precisely than anyone else, it would have to be replied to such a one that he is an innocent human being, and that, as it seems, he has encountered some wizard and imitator and been deceived. because he himself is unable to put knowledge and lack of knowledge and imitation to the test, that man seemed all wise to him. Very true, he said. Then next, I said, tragedy and its leader, Homer, must be considered, since we hear from some that these men know all arts, and all things human that have to do with virtue and vice, and the divine things too. For it is necessary that the good poet, if he is going to make fair poems about the things his poetry concerns, be in possession of knowledge when he makes his poems, or not be able to make them. Hence, we must consider whether those who tell us this have encountered these imitators and been deceived, and whether, therefore, seeing their works, they do not recognize that these works are third from what is, and are easy to make for the man who doesn't know the truth. For such a man makes what looks like beings, but are not. Or, again, is there also something to what they say? And do the good poets really know about the things that, in the opinion of the many, they say well? Most certainly, he said, that must be tested. Do you suppose that if a man were able to make both, the thing to be imitated and the phantom, he would permit himself to be serious about the crafting of the phantoms, and set this at the head of his own life as the best thing he has? No, I don't. But, I suppose, if he were in truth a knower of these things that he also imitates, he would be far more serious about the deeds than the imitations, and would try to leave many fair deeds behind as memorials of himself, and would be more eager to be the one who is lauded rather than the one who lauds. I suppose, he said. For the honor and the benefit coming from the two are hardly equal. Well, then, about the other things, let's not demand an account from Homer or any other of the poets by asking, if any one of them was a doctor and not only an imitator of medical speeches, who are the men whom any poet, old or new, is said to have made healthy, as Asclepius did, or what students of medicine he left behind, as Asclepius did his offspring. Nor, again, will we ask them about the other arts, but we'll let that go. But about the greatest and fairest thing of which Homer attempts to speak, about wars and commands of armies and governances of cities, and about the education of a human being, it is surely just to ask him and inquire, Dear Homer, if you are not third from the truth about virtue, a craftsman of a phantom, just the one we defined as an imitator, but are also second and able to recognize what sorts of practices make human beings better or worse in private and in public, tell us which of the cities was better governed thanks to you, as Lacedaemon was thanks to Lycurgus, and many others, both great and small, were thanks to many others? What city gives you credit for having proved a good lawgiver and benefited them? Italy and Sicily do so for Charindus, and we for Solon. Now who does it for you? Will he have any to mention? I don't suppose so, said Glaucon. At least the Homeridae themselves do not tell of any. Well, is any war in Homer's time remembered that was well fought with his ruling or advice? None. Well then, as is appropriate to the deeds of a wise man, do they tell of many ingenious devices for the arts or any other activities, just as for Thales the Milesian or Anacharsis the Scythian? Not at all, there's nothing of the sort. Well then, if there is nothing in public, is it told that Homer, while he was himself alive, was in private a leader in education for certain men who cherished him for his intercourse, and handed down a certain Homeric way of life to those who came after, just as Pythagoras himself was particularly cherished for this reason, and his successors even now still give Pythagoras' name to a way of life that makes them seem somehow outstanding among men. Again, he said, nothing of the sort is said, for Creophilus, Homer's comrade, would Socrates, perhaps turn out to be even more ridiculous in his education than in his name, if the things said about Homer are true. For it is told that Homer suffered considerable neglect in his own day, when he was alive. Yes, that is told, I said. But, Glaucon, if Homer were really able to educate human beings, and make them better because he is in these things capable not of imitating, but of knowing, do you suppose that he wouldn't have made many comrades, and been honored and cherished by them? But Protagoras, the Abderite after all, and Prodicus the Saian, and very many others are able by private intercourse, to impress upon the men of their time the assurance that they will be able to govern neither home nor city, unless they themselves supervise their education. And they are so intensely loved for this wisdom that their comrades do everything but carry them about on their heads. Then do you suppose that if he were able to help human beings toward virtue, the men in Homer's time would have let him or Hesiod go about being rhapsodes and wouldn't have clung to them rather than to their gold? And wouldn't they have compelled these teachers to stay with them at home? Or, if they weren't persuaded, wouldn't they themselves have attended them wherever they went, until they had gained an adequate education? In my opinion, Socrates, he said, what you say is entirely true. Shouldn't we set down all those skilled in making, beginning with Homer, as imitators of phantoms of virtue and of the other subjects of their making? They don't lay hold of the truth, rather, as we were just now saying. The painter will make what seems to be a shoemaker to those who understand as little about shoemaking as he understands, but who observe only colors and shapes. Most certainly. Then, in this way, I suppose we'll claim the poetic man also uses names and phrases to color each of the arts. He himself doesn't understand, but he imitates in such a way as to seem, to men whose condition is like his own, and who observe only speeches, to speak very well. He seems to do so when he speaks using meter, rhythm, and harmony, no matter whether the subject is shoemaking, generalship, or anything else. So great is the charm that these things by nature possess. For when the things of the poets are stripped of the colors of the music and are said alone by themselves, I suppose you know how they look, for you surely have seen. I have indeed, he said. Don't they, I said, resemble the faces of the boys who are youthful but not fair, and what happens to their looks when the bloom has forsaken them? Exactly, he said. Come now, reflect on this. The maker of the phantom, the imitator, we say, understands nothing of what is, but rather of what looks like it is. Isn't that so? Yes. Well then, let's not leave it half said, but let's see it adequately. Speak, he said. A painter, we say, will paint reins and a bit. Yes, but a shoemaker and a smith will make them. Certainly. Then does the painter understand how the reins and the bit must be? Or does even the maker not understand, the smith and the leather cutter, but only he who knows how to use them, the horseman? Very true. And won't we say that it is so for everything? How? For each thing there are these three arts, one that will use, one that will make, one that will imitate. Yes. Art the virtue, beauty, and rightness of each implement, animal and action, related to nothing but the use for which each was made, or grew naturally. That's so. It's quite necessary, then, that the man who uses each thing be most experienced, and that he report to the maker what are the good or bad points, in actual use, of the instrument he uses. For example, about flutes, a flute player surely reports to the flute maker which ones would serve him in playing, and he will prescribe how they must be made, and the other will serve him. Of course. Doesn't the man who knows report about good and bad flutes, and won't the other, trusting him, make them? Yes. Therefore the maker of the same implement will have right trust concerning its beauty and its badness from being with the man who knows and from being compelled to listen to the man who knows, while the user will have knowledge. Certainly. And will the imitator from using the things that he paints have knowledge of whether they are fair and right or not, or right opinion due to the necessity of being with the man who knows and receiving prescriptions of how he must paint? Neither. Therefore, with respect to beauty and badness, the imitator will neither know nor opine rightly about what he imitates. It doesn't seem so. The imitator in his making would be a charming chap, so far as wisdom about what he makes goes. Hardly. But all the same, he will imitate, although he doesn't know in what way each thing is bad or good. But as it seems, whatever looks to be fair to the many who don't know anything, that he will imitate. Of course he will. Then it looks like we are pretty well agreed on these things. The imitator knows nothing worth mentioning about what he imitates. Imitation is a kind of play, and not serious, and those who take up tragic poetry in iambics and in epics are all imitators in the highest possible degree. Most certainly. In the name of Zeus, I said, then isn't this imitating concerned with something that is third from the truth? Isn't that so? Yes? Now then, on which one of the parts of the human being does it have the power it has? What sort of part do you mean? This sort. The same magnitude surely doesn't look equal to our sight, from near and from far. No, it doesn't. And the same things look bent and straight when seen in water and out of it, and also both concave and convex, due to the sight's being misled by the colors, and every sort of confusion of this kind is plainly in our soul. And then it is because they take advantage of this affection in our nature that shadow painting and puppeteering and many other tricks of the kind fall nothing short of wizardry. True. And haven't measuring, counting, and weighing come to light as most charming helpers in these cases? As a result of them, we are not ruled by a thing's looking bigger or smaller, or more or heavier. Rather, we are ruled by that which has calculated, measured, or, if you please, weighed. Undeniably. But this surely must be the work of the calculating part in a soul. Yes, it is the work of that part. And to it, when it has measured and indicates that some things are bigger or smaller than others, or equal, often contrary appearances are presented at the same time, about the same things. Yes. Didn't we say that it is impossible for the same thing to opine contraries at the same time about the same things? And what we said is right. Therefore, the part of the soul opining contrary to the measures would not be the same as the part that does so in accordance with the measures. No, it wouldn't. And further, the part which trusts measure and calculation would be the best part of the soul. Of course. Therefore, the part opposed to it would be one of the ordinary things in us. Necessarily. Well, then, it was this I wanted agreed to when I said that painting and imitation as a whole are far from the truth when they produce their work, and that, moreover, imitation keeps company with the part in us that is far from prudence, and is not comrade and friend for any healthy or true purpose. Exactly, he said. Therefore, imitation, an ordinary thing having intercourse with what is ordinary, produces ordinary offspring. It seems so. Does this, I said, apply only to the imitation connected with the sight, or also to that connected with the hearing, which we name poetry? It is likely, he said, that it applies also to this. Well then, I said, let's not just trust the likelihood based on painting, but let's now go directly to the very part of thought with which poetry's imitation keeps company, and see whether it is ordinary or serious. We must. Let's present it in this way. Imitation, we say, imitates human beings performing forced or voluntary actions, and as a result of the action, supposing themselves to have done well or badly, and in all of this experiencing pain or enjoyment. Was there anything else beyond this? Nothing? Then in all this is a human being of one mind? Or just as with respect to the sight there was faction, and he had contrary opinions in himself at the same time about the same things, is there also faction in him when it comes to deeds, and does he do battle with himself? But I am reminded that there's no need for us to come to an agreement about this now. For in the previous arguments, we came to sufficient agreement about all this, asserting that our soul teems with 10,000 such oppositions arising at the same time. Rightly, he said. Yes, it was right, I said. But what we then left out, it is now necessary to go through, in my opinion. What was that? He said. A decent man, I said, who gets as his share some such chance as losing a son, or something else for which he cares particularly, as we were surely also saying then, will bear it more easily than other men. Certainly. Now, let's consider whether he won't be grieved at all, or whether this is impossible. but that he will somehow be sensible in the face of pain. The latter, he said, is closer to the truth. Now tell me this about him. Do you suppose he'll fight the pain and hold out against it more when he is seen by his peers, or when he is alone by himself in a deserted place? Surely, he said, he will fight it far more when seen. But when left alone, I suppose, he'll dare to utter many things of which he would be ashamed if someone were to hear, and will do many things he would not choose to have anyone see him do. That's so, he said. Isn't it argument and law that tell him to hold out, while the suffering itself is what draws him to the pain? True. When a contradictory tendency arises in a human being about the same thing at the same time, we say that there are necessarily two things in him. Undeniably. Isn't the one ready to be persuaded in whatever direction the law leads? How so? The law presumably says that it is finest to keep as quiet as possible in misfortunes and not be irritated, since the good and bad in such things aren't plain, nor does taking it hard get one anywhere, nor are any of the human things worthy of great seriousness. And being in pain is an impediment to the coming of that thing, the support of which we need as quickly as possible in these cases. What do you mean? He said. Deliberation, I said, about what has happened. One must accept the fall of the dice and settle one's affairs accordingly, in whatever way argument declares would be best. One must not behave like children who have stumbled and who hold on to the hurt place and spend their time in crying out. Rather, one must always habituate the soul to turn as quickly as possible to curing and setting aright what has fallen and is sick, doing away with lament by medicine. That, he said, at all events, would be the most correct way for a man to face what chance brings. And, we say, the best part is willing to follow this calculation plainly, whereas the part that leads to reminiscences of the suffering and to complaints, and can't get enough of them, won't we say that it is irrational, idle, and a friend of cowardice? Certainly we'll say that. Now then, the irritable disposition affords much and varied imitation, while the prudent and quiet character, which is always nearly equal to itself, is neither easily imitated, nor, when imitated, easily understood, especially by a festive assembly where all sorts of human beings are gathered in a theater. For the imitation is of a condition that is surely alien to them. That's entirely certain. Then plainly, the imitative poet isn't naturally directed toward any such part of the soul, and his wisdom isn't framed for satisfying it, if he's going to get a good reputation among the many, but rather toward the irritable and various disposition, because it is easily imitated. Plainly. Therefore it would at last be just for us to seize him and set him beside the painter as his antistrophe. For he is like the painter in making things that are ordinary by the standard of truth, and he is also similar in keeping company with a part of the soul that is on the same level, and not with the best part. And thus we should at last be justified in not admitting him into a city that is going to be under good laws, because he awakens this part of the soul and nourishes it, and by making it strong, destroys the calculating part. Just as in a city when someone, by making wicked men mighty, turns the city over to them and corrupts the superior ones. Similarly, we shall say the imitative poet produces a bad regime in the soul of each private man, by making phantoms that are very far removed from the truth, and by gratifying the soul's foolish part, which doesn't distinguish big from little, but believes the same things are at one time big and at another little. Most certainly. However, we haven't yet made the greatest accusation against imitation. For the fact that it succeeds in maiming even the decent men, except for a certain rare few, is surely quite terrible. Certainly, if it does indeed do that. Listen and consider. When even the best of us hear Homer or any other of the tragic poets, imitating one of the heroes in mourning and making quite an extended speech with lamentation, or, if you like, singing and beating his breast, you know that we enjoy it and that we give ourselves over to following the imitation, suffering along with the hero in all seriousness. We praise as a good poet the man who most puts us in this state. I know it, of course. But when personal sorrow comes to one of us, you are aware that, on the contrary, we pride ourselves if we are able to keep quiet and bear up, taking this to be the part of a man and what we then praised to be that of a woman. I do recognize it, he said. Is that a fine way to praise? I said. We see a man whom we would not condescend, but would rather blush to resemble, and instead of being disgusted, we enjoy it and praise it? No, by Zeus, he said, that doesn't seem reasonable. Yes, it is, I said, if you consider it in this way. In what way? If you are aware that what is then held down by force in our own misfortunes, and has hungered for tears and sufficient lament and satisfaction, since it is by nature such as to desire these things, is that which now gets satisfaction and enjoyment from the poets. What is by nature best in us, because it hasn't been adequately educated by argument or habit, relaxes its guard over this mournful part, because it sees in others sufferings, and it isn't shameful for it. If some other man who claims to be good laments out of season, to praise and pity him, rather it believes that it gains the pleasure and wouldn't permit itself to be deprived of it by despising the whole poem. I suppose that only a certain few men are capable of calculating that the enjoyment of other people's sufferings has a necessary effect on one's own. For the pitying part, fed strong on these examples, is not easily held down in one's own sufferings. Very true, he said. Doesn't the same argument also apply to the laughing part? If there are any jokes that you would be ashamed to make yourself, but that you enjoy very much hearing in comic imitation or in private, and you don't hate them as bad, you do the same as with things that evoke pity. For that in you which, wanting to make jokes, you then held down by argument, afraid of the reputation of buffoonery, you now release, and having made it lusty there, have unawares been carried away in your own things, so that you become a comic poet. Quite so, he said. And as for sex and spiritedness too, and for all the desires, pains, and pleasures in the soul that we say follow all our action, poetic imitation produces similar results in us. For it fosters and waters them when they ought to be dried up, and sets them up as rulers in us when they ought to be ruled, so that we may become better and happier, instead of worse and more wretched. I can't say otherwise, he said. Then, Glaucon, I said, when you meet praisers of Homer who say that this poet educated Greece, and that in the management and education of human affairs, it is worthwhile to take him up for study and for living, by arranging one's whole life according to this poet, you must love and embrace them as being men who are the best they can be, and agree that Homer is the most poetic and first of the tragic poets. But you must know that only so much of poetry as is hymns to gods or celebration of good men should be admitted into a city. And if you admit the sweetened muse in lyrics or epics, pleasure and pain will jointly be kings in your city, instead of law, and that argument which in each instance is best in the opinion of the community. Very true, he said. Well, I said, since we brought up the subject of poetry again, let it be our apology that it was then fitting for us to send it away from the city on account of its character. The argument determined us. Let us further say to it, lest it convict us for a certain harshness and rusticity, that there is an old quarrel between philosophy and poetry. For that yelping bitch shrieking at her master, and great in the empty eloquence of fools, the mob of over-wise men holding sway, and the refined thinkers who are really poor, and countless others, are signs of this old opposition. All the same, let it be said that, if poetry directed to pleasure and imitation have any argument to give showing that they should be in a city with good laws, we should be delighted to receive them back from exile, since we are aware that we ourselves are charmed by them. But it isn't wholly to betray what seems to be the truth. Aren't you too, my friend, charmed by it, especially when you contemplate it through the medium of Homer. Very much so. Isn't it just for it to come back in this way, when it has made an apology in lyrics or some other meter? Most certainly. And surely we would also give its protectors, those who aren't poets but lovers of poetry, occasion to speak an argument without meter on its behalf, showing that it's not only pleasant, but also beneficial to regimes and human life. And we shall listen benevolently, for surely we shall gain if it should turn out to be not only pleasant, but also beneficial. We would, he said, undeniably gain. But if not, my dear comrade, just like the men who have once fallen in love with someone, and don't believe the love is beneficial, keep away from it, even if they have to do violence to themselves, so we too, due to the inborn love of such poetry we owe to our rearing in these fine regimes, will be glad if it turns out that it is best and truest. But as long as it's not able to make its apology, when we listen to it, we'll chant this argument we are making to ourselves, as a counter-charm, taking care against falling back again into this love, which is childish and belongs to the many. We are, at all events, aware that such poetry mustn't be taken seriously, as a serious thing laying hold of truth, but that the man who hears it must be careful, fearing for the regime in himself, and must hold what we have said about poetry. Entirely, he said. I join you in saying that. For the contest is great, my dear Glaucon, I said, greater than it seems. This contest that concerns becoming good or bad, so we mustn't be tempted by honor or money or any ruling office, or, for that matter, poetry, into thinking that it's worthwhile to neglect justice and the rest of virtue. I join you in saying that, he said, on the basis of what we have gone through, and I suppose anyone else would too. And yet, I said, we haven't gone through the greatest rewards and prizes proposed for virtue. You are speaking of an inconceivable greatness, he said, if there are others greater than those mentioned. What that is great could come to pass in a short time, I said. For surely the whole of the time from childhood to old age would be short when compared with all time. Rather, it's nothing at all, he said. What then? Do you suppose that an immortal thing ought to be serious about so short a time, and not about all time? I do suppose so, he said. But what do you mean by this? Haven't you perceived, I said, that our soul is immortal and is never destroyed? And he looked me in the face with wonder and said, No, by Zeus, I haven't. Can you say that? If I am not to do an injustice, I said, and I suppose you can too, for it's nothing hard. It is for me, he said. But I would gladly hear from you this thing that isn't hard. You must hear it, I said. Just speak, he said. Do you, I said, call something good and something bad? I do. Then do you have the same understanding of them as I do? What's that? What destroys and corrupts everything is the bad, and what saves and benefits is the good. I do, he said. And what about this? Do you say there is something bad and something good for each thing? For example, ophthalmia for the eyes, and sickness for the entire body? Blight for grain, rot for wood, rust for iron and bronze. And as I say, for nearly all things is there an evil and illness naturally connected with each. I do, he said. When one of these attaches itself to something, doesn't it make the thing to which it attaches itself bad, and in the end, wholly dissolve and destroy it? Undeniably. Therefore, the evil naturally connected with each thing and its particular badness destroys it. Or if this doesn't destroy it, surely there is nothing else that could still corrupt it. For surely the good would never destroy anything, nor again, would what is neither bad nor good. How could they? He said. Therefore, if we find any existing thing that has an evil that makes it bad, but is, however, not able to dissolve and destroy it, then won't we know that for a thing that is naturally so, there is no destruction? That's likely, he said. What then? I said. Doesn't the soul have something that makes it bad? Very much so, he said. All the things we were just going through. injustice, licentiousness, cowardice, and lack of learning? Does any one of them dissolve and destroy it? And reflect, so that we won't be deceived into supposing that the unjust and foolish human being, when he is caught doing injustice, is then destroyed due to the injustice, which is a badness of soul. But do it this way, just as the badness of body, which is disease, melts and destroys a body, and brings it to the point where it is not even a body. Similarly, all the things of which we were just speaking are corrupted by their own specific vice, which attaches itself to them and is present in them, and they finally come to the point where they are not. Isn't that so? Yes? Come, then, and consider soul in the same way. Do injustice and the rest of vice when they are present in it, by being present and attaching themselves. Corrupt and wither it until, brought to the point of death, they separate it from the body? That's not at all the way it is, he said. But it is, on the contrary, unreasonable, I said, that a thing be destroyed by a badness that is alien, and not by one that is its own. It is unreasonable. Reflect, Glaucon, I said, that we don't suppose a body should be destroyed by the badness of foods, whatever it may be, whether it is their oldness, rottenness, or anything else. But if the badness of the foods themselves introduces the badness of body into the body, we shall say that due to them it was destroyed by its own vice, which is disease. But we shall never admit that the body, which is one thing, is corrupted by the badness of food, which is another thing, if the alien evil does not introduce the evil that is naturally connected with the body. What you say, he said, is quite right. Well then, I said, according to the same argument, if badness of body doesn't introduce badness of soul into a soul, we would never admit that a soul is destroyed by an alien evil that does not bring with it the specific badness of a soul. That is, we would not admit that one thing is destroyed by the evil of another. That's reasonable, he said. Well then, either let's refute what we are saying and show that it's not fine, or, as long as it's unrefuted, let's never assert that by fever, or by another illness, or again by slaughter, even if someone cuts the whole body up into the smallest pieces, a soul is ever closer to being destroyed as a result of these things. Before someone proves that due to these sufferings of the body, the soul itself becomes unjuster and unholier. But when an alien vice comes to be in something else, and its own peculiar vice does not come to be in it, let's not permit anyone to assert that a soul or anything else is destroyed. On the contrary, he said, no one will ever show that when men are dying, their souls become unjust due to death. And, I said, if someone dares to come to close quarters with the argument and say that the dying man becomes worse and unjuster, just so as not to be compelled to agree that souls are immortal, we shall surely insist that, if the man who says this says the truth, injustice is fatal to him who has it, even as disease is, and that, since by its nature, it kills. Those who get it die from it, those who get most, more quickly, those who get less, in more leisurely fashion. They would be unlike the unjust men, who, as things now stand, do indeed die from injustice, but at the hands of other men who administer the penalty. By Zeus, he said, then injustice won't look like such a very terrible thing if it will be fatal to the one who gets it. For it would be a relief from evils. But I suppose rather that it will look, all to the contrary, like it kills other men, if it can, but makes its possessor very much alive, and in addition to alive, sleepless. So far, surely, as it seems, does its camp lie from fatality. What you say is fine, I said. For surely, whenever its own badness and its own evil are not sufficient to kill and destroy a soul, an evil assigned to the destruction of something else will hardly destroy a soul, or anything else except that to which it is assigned. Yes, hardly, he said, at least as is likely. Therefore, since it's not destroyed by a single evil, either its own or an alien, it's plainly necessary that it be always, and if it is always, that it be immortal. That is necessary, he said. Well then, I said, let this be so. And if it is, you recognize that there would always be the same souls. For surely they could not become fewer if none is destroyed, nor again more numerous. For if any of the immortal things should become more numerous, you know that they would come from the mortal, and everything would end up by being immortal. What you say is true. But, I said, let's not suppose this, for the argument won't permit it, nor that soul by its truest nature is such that it is full of much variety, dissimilarity, and quarrel with itself. How do you mean? He said. It's not easy, I said, for a thing to be eternal that is both composed out of many things, and whose composition is not of the finest, as the soul now looked to us. No, at least it's not likely. Well then, that soul is immortal both the recent argument and the others would compel us to accept. But it must be seen such as it is in truth, not maimed by community with body and other evils, as we now see it. But what it is like when it has become pure must be examined sufficiently by calculation, and one will find it far fairer and discern justice and injustice, and everything we have now gone through more distinctly. Now we were telling the truth about it as it looks at present. However, that is based only on the condition in which we saw it. Just as those who catch sight of the sea Glaucus would no longer easily see his original nature, because some of the old parts of his body have been broken off, and the others have been ground down and thoroughly maimed by the waves, at the same time as other things have grown on him, shells, seaweed, and rocks, so that he resembles any beast, rather than what he was by nature. So, too, we see the soul in such a condition because of countless evils. But, Glaucon, one must look elsewhere. Where? He said. To its love of wisdom, and recognize what it lays hold of, and with what sort of things it longs to keep company on the grounds that it is akin to the divine and immortal, and what is, always, and what it would become like if it were to give itself entirely to this longing, and were brought by this impulse out of the deep ocean in which it now is, and the rocks and shells were hammered off, those which, because it feasts on earth, have grown around it in a wild, earthy, and rocky profusion, as a result of those feasts that are called happy. And then one would see its true nature, whether it is many-formed or single-formed, or in what way it is and how. But now, as I suppose, we have fairly gone through its affections and forms in its human life. That's entirely certain, he said. In the argument, I said, haven't we both cleared away the other parts of the criticism, and also not brought in the wages and reputations connected with justice, as you said Hesiod and Homer do? But we found that justice by itself is best for soul itself, and that the soul must do the just things, whether it has Gyges' ring or not, and in addition to such a ring, Hades' cap. What you say is very true, he said. Then, Glaucon, I said, isn't it now at last unobjectionable, in addition, also to give back to justice and the rest of virtue the wages, in their quantity and in their quality, that they procure for the soul from human beings and gods, both while the human being is still alive, and when he is dead? That's entirely certain, he said. Then will you give back to me what you borrowed in the argument? What in particular? I gave you the just man's seeming to be unjust, and the unjust man just. You both asked for it, even if it weren't possible for this to escape gods and human beings. All the same, it had to be granted for the argument's sake, so that justice itself could be judged as compared with injustice itself. Or don't you remember? If I didn't, he said, I should indeed be doing an injustice. Well then, I said, since they have been judged, on justice's behalf, I ask back again the reputation it in fact has among gods and among human beings. And I ask us to agree that it does enjoy such a reputation, so that justice may also carry off the prizes that it gains from seeming, and bestows on its possessors, since it has made clear that it bestows the good things that come from being, and does not deceive those who really take possession of it. What you ask, he said, is only just. Then, I said, won't you first give this back, that it doesn't escape the notice of gods at least, what each of the two men is?" "Yes," he said, "we shall give that back." "And if they don't escape notice, the one would be dear to the gods, and the other hateful, as we also agreed at the beginning?" "That's so." "And won't we agree that everything that comes to the man dear to the gods, insofar as it comes from gods, is the best possible, except for any necessary evil that was due to him for former mistakes?" "Most certainly." "Thus it must be assumed in the case of the just man, that if he falls into poverty, diseases, or any other of the things that seem bad, for him it will end in some good, either in life or even in death. For surely gods at least will never neglect the man who is eagerly willing to become just, and practicing virtue, likens himself, so far as is possible for a human being, to a god." "It's quite likely," he said, "that such a man isn't neglected by his like." "And in the case of the unjust man, mustn't we think the opposite of these things?" "Very much so." "Then, such would be some of the prizes from gods to the just man. In my opinion, at least," he said. "And what does he get from human beings?" I said. "Or if that which is must be asserted, isn't it this way? Don't the clever, unjust men do exactly as do all those in a race who run well from the lower end of the course, but not from the upper? At the start they leap sharply away, but end up by becoming ridiculous, and with their ears on their shoulders run off uncrowned. But those who are truly runners come to the end, take the prizes, and are crowned. Doesn't it also, for the most part, turn out that way with the just? Toward the end of every action, association, and life, they get a good reputation, and bear off the prizes from human beings." "Quite so." "Will you, then, stand for my saying about them what you yourself said about the unjust? For I shall say that it's precisely the just, when they get older, who rule in their city if they wish ruling offices, and marry wherever they wish, and give in marriage to whomever they want. And everything you said about the unjust, I now say about these men. And again about the unjust, I shall say that most of them, even if they get away unnoticed when they are young, are caught at the end of the race and ridiculed, and when they get old, they are insulted in their wretchedness by foreigners and townsmen. As for being whipped and the things that you, speaking truly, said are rustic, that they will be racked and burned, suppose that you have also heard from me that they suffer all these things. But as I say, see if you'll stand for it." "Very much so," he said, "for what you say is just." "Well then," I said, "such would be the prizes, wages, and gifts coming to the just man while alive from gods and human beings, in addition to those good things that justice itself procured. And they are," he said, "quite fair and sure ones." "Well," I said, "they are nothing in multitude or magnitude compared to those that await each when dead. And these things should be heard, so that in hearing them each of these men will have gotten back the full measure of what the argument owed him." "Do tell," he said, "since there aren't many other things that would be more pleasant to hear." "I will not, however, tell you a story of Alcinous," I said, "but rather of a strong man, son of Arminius, by race a Pamphylian. Once upon a time he died in war, and on the 10th day, when the corpses already decayed were picked up, he was picked up in a good state of preservation. Having been brought home, he was about to be buried on the 12th day. As he was lying on the pyre, he came back to life. And come back to life, he told what he saw in the other world. He said that when his soul departed, it made a journey in the company of many, and they came to a certain demonic place, where there were 2 openings in the earth next to one another, and again 2 in the heaven, above and opposite the others. Between them sat judges, who, when they had passed judgment, told the just to continue their journey to the right and upward through the heaven, and they attached signs of the judgments in front of them. The unjust they told to continue their journey to the left and down, and they had behind them signs of everything they had done. And when he himself came forward, they said that he had to become a messenger to human beings of the things there, and they told him to listen and to look at everything in the place. He saw there, at one of the openings of both heaven and earth, the souls going away when judgment had been passed on them. As to the other two openings, souls out of the earth, full of dirt and dust, came up from one of them, and down from the other came other souls, pure from heaven. And the souls that were never arriving looked as though they had come from a long journey. And they went away with delight to the meadow, as to a public festival, and set up camp there. All those who were acquaintances greeted one another, and the souls that came out of the earth inquired of the others about the things in the other place, and those from heaven about the things that had happened to those from the earth. And they told their stories to one another, the ones lamenting and crying, remembering how much and what sort of things they had suffered and seen in the journey under the earth. The journey lasts 1,000 years, and those from heaven in their turn told of the inconceivable beauty of the experiences and the sights there. Now to go through the many things would take a long time, Glaucon. But the sum, he said, was this. For all the unjust deeds they had done anyone, and all the men to whom they had done injustice, they had paid the penalty for every one in turn, 10 times over for each. That is, they were punished for each injustice once every 100 years, taking this as the length of human life. In this way, they could pay off the penalty for the injustice 10 times over. Thus, for example, if some men were causes of the death of many, either by betraying cities or armies and had reduced men to slavery, or were involved in any other wrongdoing, they received for each of these things 10-fold sufferings. And again, if they had done good deeds and had proved just and holy, in the same measure did they receive reward. And about those who were only just born and lived a short time, he said other things not worth mentioning. And he told of still greater wages for impiety, and piety toward gods and parents, and for murder. For he said he was there when one man was asked by another, "Where is Ardiaeus the Great?" This Ardiaeus had been tyrant in a certain city of Pamphylia just 1,000 years before that time. He had, as was said, killed his old father and elder brother, and done many other unholy deeds. Now said that the man asked responded, "He hasn't come, nor will he come here," he asserted. For this too, of course, was one of the terrible sights we saw. When we were near the mouth about to go up, and had suffered everything else, we suddenly saw him and others. Just about all of them were tyrants, but there were also some private men, of those who had committed great faults. They supposed they were ready to go up, but the mouth did not admit them. It roared when one of those whose badness is incurable, or who had not paid a sufficient penalty, attempted to go up. There were men at that place, he said, fierce men, looking fiery through and through, standing by and observing the sound, who took hold of some and led them away, but who bound Ardiaeus and others' hands, feet, and head, threw them down and stripped off their skin. They dragged them along the wayside, carding them like wool on thorns. And they indicated to those who came by for what reason this was done, and that these men would be led away and thrown into Tartarus. They had experienced many fears of all kinds, he said, but more extreme than any was the fear that each man experienced lest the sound come as he went up. And when it was silent, each went up with the greatest delight. Such then were the penalties and punishments, and on the other hand, the bounties were the antistrophes of these. When each group had spent 7 days in the plain, on the 8th they were made to depart from there and continue their journey. In 4 days they arrived at a place from which they could see a straight light, like a column, stretched from above through all of heaven and earth, most of all resembling the rainbow, but brighter and purer. They came to it after having moved forward a day's journey, and there at the middle of the light they saw the extremities of its bonds stretched from heaven. For this light is that which binds heaven, like the undergirders of triremes, thus holding the entire revolution together. From the extremities stretched the spindle of necessity, by which all the revolutions are turned. Its stem and hook are of adamant, and its whorl is a mixture of this and other kinds. The nature of the whorl is like this. Its shape is like those we have here, but from what he said, it must be conceived as if in one great hollow whorl, completely scooped out, lay another like it but smaller, fitting into each other as bowls fit into each other, and there is a third one like these, and a fourth, and 4 others. For there are 8 whorls in all, lying in one another with their rims showing as circles from above, while from the back they form one continuous whorl around the stem, which is driven right through the middle of the 8th. Now the circle formed by the lip of the first and outermost whorl is the broadest, that of the 6th, 2nd, that of the 4th, 3rd, that of the 8th, 4th, that of the 7th, 5th, that of the 5th, 6th, that of the 3rd, 7th, and that of the 2nd, 8th. And the lip of the largest whorl is multicolored, that of the 7th brightest. That of the 8th gets its color from the 7th's shining on it. That of the 2nd and the 5th are like each other, yellower than these others. The 3rd has the whitest color, the 4th is reddish, and the 6th is second in whiteness. The whole spindle is turned in a circle with the same motion. But within the revolving whole, the 7 inner circles revolve gently in the opposite direction from the whole. Of them, the 8th goes most quickly. Second and together with one another are the 7th, 6th, and 5th. Third in swiftness, as it looked to them, the 4th circled about, 4th the 3rd, and 5th the 2nd. And the spindle turned in the lap of necessity. Above on each of its circles is perched a siren, accompanying its revolution, uttering a single sound. One note, from all 8 is produced the accord of a single harmony. 3 others are seated round about at equal distances, each on a throne. Daughters of necessity, Fates, Lachesis, Clotho, and Atropos, clad in white with wreaths on their heads, they sing to the siren's harmony. Lachesis of what has been, Clotho of what is, and Atropos of what is going to be. And Clotho puts her right hand to the outer revolution of the spindle and joins in turning it, ceasing from time to time, and Atropos with her left hand does the same to the inner ones. But Lachesis puts one hand to one and the other hand to the other, each in turn. Now when they arrived, they had to go straight to Lachesis. A certain spokesman first marshaled them at regular distances from each other. Then he took lots and patterns of lives from Lachesis' lap and went up to a high platform and said, "This is the speech of necessity's maiden daughter, Lachesis. Souls that live a day, this is the beginning of another death-bringing cycle for the mortal race. A demon will not select you, but you will choose a demon. Let him who gets the first lot make the first choice of a life to which he will be bound by necessity. Virtue is without a master, as he honors or dishonors her. Each will have more or less of her. The blame belongs to him who chooses. God is blameless." When he had said this, he cast the lots among them all, and each picked up the one that fell next to him, except for who wasn't permitted to do so. To the man who picked it up, it was plain what number he had drawn. After this, in turn, he set the patterns of the lives on the ground before them. There were far more than there were souls present. There were all sorts, lives of all animals, and in particular, all the varieties of human lives. There were tyrannies among them, some lasting to the end, others ruined midway, ending both in poverty and exile and in beggary. And there were lives of men of repute, some for their forms and beauty, and for strength in general as well as capacity in contests, others for their birth and the virtues of their ancestors. And there were some for men without repute in these things, and the same was the case for women too. An ordering of the soul was not in them, due to the necessity that a soul become different according to the life it chooses. But all other things were, mixed with each other and with wealth and poverty and with sickness and health, and also with the states intermediate to these. Now here, my dear Glaucon, is the whole risk for a human being, as it seems. And on this account each of us must, to the neglect of other studies, above all see to it that he is a seeker and student of that study, by which he might be able to learn and find out who will give him the capacity and the knowledge to distinguish the good and the bad life, and so everywhere and always to choose the better from among those that are possible. He will take into account all the things we have just mentioned, and how in combination and separately they affect the virtue of a life. Thus he may know the effects, good and bad, of beauty, mixed with poverty or wealth, and accompanied by this or that habit of soul, and the effects of any particular mixture with one another of good and bad birth, private station and ruling office, strength and weakness, facility and difficulty in learning, and all such things that are connected with a soul by nature or are acquired. From all this he will be able to draw a conclusion and choose, in looking off toward the nature of the soul, between the worse and the better life, calling worse the one that leads it toward becoming more unjust, and better the one that leads it to becoming juster. He will let everything else go, for we have seen that this is the most important choice for him in life and death. He must go to Hades, adamantly holding to this opinion, so that he won't be daunted by wealth and such evils there, and rush into tyrannies and other such deeds by which he would work many irreparable evils, and himself undergo still greater suffering. But rather he will know how always to choose the life between such extremes, and flee the excesses in either direction in this life, so far as is possible, and in all of the next life. For in this way a human being becomes happiest. And the messenger from that place then also reported that the spokesman said the following: Even for the man who comes forward last, if he chooses intelligently and lives earnestly, a life to content him is laid up, not a bad one. Let the one who begins not be careless about his choice. Let not the one who is last be disheartened. He said that when the spokesman had said this, the man who had drawn the first lot came forward and immediately chose the greatest tyranny, and due to folly and gluttony, chose without having considered everything adequately, and it escaped his notice that eating his own children and other evils were fated to be a part of that life. When he considered it at his leisure, he beat his breast and lamented the choice, not abiding by the spokesman's forewarning. For he didn't blame himself for the evils, but chance, demons, and anything rather than himself. He was one of those who had come from heaven, having lived in an orderly regime in his former life, participating in virtue by habit, without philosophy. And it may be said, not the least number of those who were caught in such circumstances came from heaven, because they were unpracticed in labors. But most of those who came from the earth, because they themselves had labored and had seen the labors of others, weren't in a rush to make their choices. On just this account, and due to the chance of the lot, there was an exchange of evils and goods for most of the souls. However, if a man, when he comes to the life here, always philosophizes in a healthy way, and the lot for his choice does not fall out among the last, it's likely, on the basis of what is reported from there, that he will not only be happy here, but also that he will journey from this world to the other and back again, not by the underground, rough road, but by the smooth one, through the heavens. He said that this was a sight surely worth seeing, how each of the several souls chose a life. For it was pitiable, laughable, and wonderful to see. For the most part, the choice was made according to the habituation of their former life. He said he saw a soul that once belonged to Orpheus, choosing the life of a swan, out of hatred for womankind. Due to his death at their hands, he wasn't willing to be born, generated in a woman. He saw Thamyra's soul, choosing the life of a nightingale. And he also saw a swan changing to the choice of a human life. Other musical animals did the same thing. The soul that got the 20th lot chose the life of a lion. It was the soul of Ajax, son of Telamon, who shunned becoming a human being, remembering the judgment of the arms. And after him was the soul of Agamemnon. It too hated humankind, as a result of its sufferings, and therefore changed to the life of an eagle. Atalanta's soul had drawn one of the middle lots. She saw the great honors of an athletic man, and couldn't pass them by, but took them. After this, he saw that of Epeus, son of Panopeus, going into the nature of an artisan woman. And far out among the last he saw the soul of the buffoon Thersites, clothing itself as an ape. And by chance Odysseus' soul had drawn the last lot of all, and went to choose. From memory of its former labors it had recovered from love of honor. It went around for a long time, looking for the life of a private man who minds his own business, and with effort it found one lying somewhere, neglected by the others. It said when it saw this life that it would have done the same even if it had drawn the first lot, and was delighted to choose it. And from the other beasts, similarly some went into human lives and into one another, the unjust changing into savage ones, the just into tame ones, and there were all kinds of mixtures. When all the souls had chosen lives, in the same order as the lots they had drawn, they went forward to Lachesis, and she sent with each the demon he had chosen as a guardian of the life and a fulfiller of what was chosen. The demon first led the soul to Clotho, under her hand as it turned the whirling spindle, thus ratifying the fate it had drawn and chosen. After touching her, he next led it to the spinning of Atropos, thus making the threads irreversible. And from there, without turning around, they went under Necessity's throne, and having come out through it, when the others had also come through, all made their way through terrible stifling heat to the plain of Lethe, for it was barren of trees and all that naturally grows on earth. Then they made their camp, for evening was coming on, by the river of carelessness, whose water no vessel can contain. Now it was a necessity for all to drink a certain measure of the water, but those who were not saved by prudence drank more than the measure. As he drank, each forgot everything, and when they had gone to sleep and it was midnight, there came thunder and an earthquake, and they were suddenly carried from there, each in a different way, up to their birth, shooting like stars. But he himself was prevented from drinking the water. However, in what way and how he came into his body, he did not know. But all of a sudden, he recovered his sight and saw that it was morning and he was lying on the pyre. And thus, Glaucon, a tale was saved and not lost, and it could save us if we were persuaded by it. And we shall make a good crossing of the river of Lethe and not defile our soul. But if we are persuaded by me, holding that soul is immortal and capable of bearing all evils and all goods, we shall always keep to the upper road and practice justice with prudence in every way, so that we shall be friends to ourselves and the gods, both while we remain here and when we reap the rewards for it, like the victors who go about gathering in the prizes. And so here and in the 1,000-year journey that we have described, we shall fare well.